Before we begin tonight's story, if you're finding value in these accounts from America's national parks, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that like button. It really helps us continue bringing you these unsettling, true stories. And I'm curious, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. Now, let's get into what happened at Yellowstone in the winter of 1995. My name is David Tanner, and before everything in my life changed, I worked as a park ranger at Yellowstone National Park for over 8 years. In the winter months, the park transforms from a crowded tourist destination into a completely snow-covered, 3.2 million acre untouched wilderness, and only those trained to survive in conditions where you risk losing your life in seconds, if you're not careful, can enter. February 1995 was one of the worst winters in Yellowstone's recorded history. We'd had 17 feet of snow by mid-month, temperatures dropping to 40 below, winds that could strip the flesh from exposed skin. Most of the park was closed to visitors, the roads impassable, the backcountry a white void that swallowed sound and direction. It was the kind of winter where you could walk 20 feet from your cabin and never find your way back. I loved it. There's something pure about winter patrol in Yellowstone. No crowds, no questions about where the bathrooms are, no traffic jams at Old Faithful. Just you, the snow, and the geothermal features that never stop, never freeze, no matter how cold it gets. Steam rising from the geysers, creating clouds of vapor that hang in the air like ghosts. Hot springs that glow blue and green against the white landscape, pools of boiling water rimmed with ice. The park becomes something else in winter, something ancient and indifferent, the way it was before humans arrived with their cameras and their expectations. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, I was assigned to a backcountry patrol in the Norris Geyser Basin area. Norris is the hottest and most active thermal area in the park, sitting right on top of the Yellowstone caldera, the massive volcanic chamber that's earned the park its reputation as a supervolcano. The basin changes constantly, new features appearing overnight, old ones going dormant. We had to monitor it regularly, make sure no new thermal hazards had developed that could endanger the few backcountry skiers crazy enough to venture out in these conditions. The weather forecast was bad but manageable. Light snow, winds under 30 miles per hour, visibility decent. I'd been out in worse. I packed my gear, checked my radio, and headed out just after dawn on snowshoes, pulling a small sled with my equipment and emergency supplies. The first few hours were routine. I reached my checkpoint stations, documented the thermal features I was assigned to monitor, took temperature readings and pH samples from several hot springs. Everything was normal, or as normal as Yellowstone gets. The ground temperature at Norris averaged about 200 degrees Fahrenheit just a few feet down. The steam vents hissed and bubbled, the mud pots gurgled, and Steamboat Geyser, the tallest active geyser in the world, sat dormant as it had for months. By noon, the weather started to turn. The wind picked up, coming from the north in gusts that made the snowshoes slip. The light snow became heavy, thick flakes that stuck to everything and reduced visibility to maybe 50 feet. I checked my position on the GPS and decided to head back. I'd completed most of my route and there was no point pushing it in deteriorating conditions. That's when the whiteout hit. If you've never experienced a true whiteout, it's hard to explain. The snow becomes so thick that you can't tell where the ground ends and the sky begins. Everything is white, featureless, directionless. You could be standing 3 feet from a tree and never see it. Your sense of balance goes haywire because there are no visual references. Some people get vertigo so bad they fall down and can't get back up. I stopped immediately, following my training. Moving in a whiteout is suicide. You get disoriented, wander in circles, exhaust yourself, and die of hypothermia within hours. The smart thing to do is find shelter, set up your emergency bivouac, and wait it out. I activated my GPS to mark my position and felt my stomach drop. No signal. The device showed an error message I'd never seen before. Position unknown. Coordinate error. That was impossible. GPS doesn't just stop working. Even with heavy cloud cover, you should get some signal. I tried my radio next. Mammoth Dispatch, this is Ranger Tanner. Backcountry Norris Patrol. I'm caught in a whiteout and my GPS is malfunctioning. Requesting position confirmation and weather update. Static. Then more static. No response. I tried again, cycling through all the Ranger frequencies. Nothing, just white noise that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the wind. The cold was starting to penetrate my layers. I needed to make a decision. Stay put and hope the whiteout passed, which could take hours or days, or try to find shelter. I had my compass, and I knew there was a ranger cabin somewhere to the northeast, maybe 2 miles away. In good conditions, an easy hike. In a whiteout, potentially fatal. But I also knew that staying in the open in these temperatures wasn't sustainable. My emergency bivouac would keep me alive, but barely. If the storm lasted more than 24 hours, I'd be in real trouble. I decided to risk it. I took a bearing on my compass, northeast, and started moving slowly, counting my steps, stopping every 100 paces to recheck my direction. The wind howled, driving snow into my face despite my goggles. I kept my head down, focused on the compass, on putting one snowshoe in front of the other. After what felt like an hour, but was probably 20 minutes, I saw it, a dark shape looming out of the white void. A building. Relief flooded through me. I'd found the ranger cabin. I pushed forward, fighting the wind, until I reached what I thought would be the familiar weathered wood of the structure. It wasn't the ranger cabin. The building in front of me was concrete and metal, low and bunker-like, partially buried in snow. It had a flat roof and small, narrow windows, the kind you'd see in a government facility from the 50s or 60s. There was a door, heavy steel with a circular handle like a submarine hatch. I'd never seen this building before. In 8 years of working Yellowstone, including 6 winters in the backcountry, I'd never encountered this structure. It wasn't on any of our maps, but it was shelter, and I was losing feeling in my fingers despite my gloves. I grabbed the handle and pulled. The door was frozen, but after some effort it groaned open, exhaling a breath of warm air that hit me like a wall. The interior was dark, but I could see emergency lighting, dim red bulbs that cast everything in a crimson glow. I stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind me, cutting off the wind and the cold. The sudden silence was shocking. My ears rang from the absence of the howling storm. I was in some kind of entryway or airlock. There was another door ahead, this one with a small glass window. Through it, I could see more red emergency lighting and what looked like a corridor. On the wall next to the door was a sign, official-looking, stenciled in that specific font the government used in the 60s. U.S. Geological Survey, Yellowstone Geothermal Research Station. 7. Authorized personnel. Only established 1962. This building had been here since 1962, and I'd never heard of it. The National Park Service took over Yellowstone from the Army in 1918, and they definitely would have known about any USGS research stations, unless this was one of those Cold War facilities that got classified and forgotten. I tried the inner door. It opened easily, and I stepped into the corridor. The red emergency lights continued down a hallway that branched in both directions. The walls were painted that specific shade of institutional green that screamed 1960s government construction. The floor was white linoleum, scuffed but clean. The air was warm, almost uncomfortably so, and smelled of minerals and something chemical I couldn't identify. "Hello?" I called out. Anyone here? This is Park Ranger David Tanner. I got caught in the storm and I'm seeking shelter." My voice echoed down the empty corridors. No response. I walked slowly down the left branch, my snow-covered boots leaving wet prints on the linoleum. The hallway was lined with doors, each one labeled Lab 1, Lab 2, Equipment Storage, Communications. At the end of the hall was a larger door marked Main Operations Center. I pushed it open and froze. The room was occupied. 3 people, 2 men and a woman, sat at a bank of instruments and monitoring equipment. They were wearing lab coats over clothes that looked distinctly out of date, the kind of button-down shirts and slacks you'd see in old photographs. The equipment they were working with was all analog, no digital displays, just dials and gauges and paper chart recorders. They all turned to look at me, and their expressions were a mixture of surprise and something else. Fear, maybe, or recognition. The woman stood up slowly. She was in her 50s with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing cat-eye glasses that I hadn't seen on anyone under 70 in my entire life. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm sorry to intrude. I'm Park Ranger David Tanner. I got caught in a whiteout and my GPS malfunctioned. This was the only shelter I could find." I gestured back toward the door. I didn't know this facility existed. I thought all the USGS stations in this area were decommissioned in the 70s. The woman exchanged glances with the 2 men. One of them, younger, maybe late 30s with thick-rimmed glasses and a crew cut, stood up as well. "What year is it?" he asked. The question was so unexpected that I laughed. "What year? It's 1995, February 14th, 1995. The 3 of them went pale. The older man, heavy-set with thinning hair and a mustache, actually sat back down hard, like his legs had given out. "That's not possible," the woman whispered. "That's not... We've only been here for 11 months. It's September 1962. It has to be September 1962. I felt the temperature in the room drop, or maybe it was just my blood running cold. "Ma'am, I don't know what's going on here, but it's definitely 1995. I've got ID, a radio, equipment, all dated 1995. "Show me," she demanded. I pulled out my Ranger ID, my watch, my GPS unit. I laid them on the table in front of her. She picked up the GPS with shaking hands, staring at the error message on the screen. "This technology," she said quietly. "This doesn't exist. Not in 1962, not even theoretically." The younger man picked up my watch. Digital display, quartz movement. These were still being developed in '62. They weren't commercially available until the '70s. "Because it is the '90s, I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "Look, I don't know what kind of research you're doing here, or if this is some kind of weird experiment, but I need to radio my station and let them know I'm safe. Can I use your communications equipment?" "It won't work," the older man said. He had a deep voice with a slight accent. Eastern European, maybe. "The radio only connects to 1962 frequencies. We've tried to reach anyone outside the station. No one responds, because they're 33 years in the past." "That's insane." "Is it?" The woman gestured around the room. "Look at this facility, Ranger Tanner. Look at the equipment, the architecture, the way we're dressed. Does this look like 1995 to you?" She had a point. Everything about this place screamed mid-century, from the color scheme to the furniture to the people themselves. "Okay, let's say I believe you, which I don't, but let's say I do. You're claiming you've been in this building since February 1962, and somehow time has passed differently for you than the outside world?" "Not differently," the younger man said. He walked to a large chalkboard covered in equations and diagrams. Time is passing at exactly the same rate, but we're not in the same time anymore. This facility, Station 7, exists in a temporal anchor. A bubble, if you will, locked to the moment it was activated on February 12, 1962. A temporal anchor. The geothermal activity here, he continued, pointing to a diagram that showed the Yellowstone caldera and its magma chamber, creates massive amounts of energy. We theorize that under the right conditions, that energy could affect the fabric of space-time. We built Station 7 directly above the center of the caldera, using the heat differential between the magma chamber and the surface to generate a field that would, theoretically, slow down time at the quantum level. Why would you want to do that? The three of them exchanged looks again. The woman sighed. It was the Cold War, Ranger Tanner. We were researching everything. The military wanted to know if we could use Yellowstone as a weapon, if we could control the eruption, direct it, speed it up, or slow it down. The Soviets were doing similar research with their supervolcanoes. We built Station 7 as a monitoring post, but also as a testbed for temporal manipulation. If we could slow time around the caldera, we could potentially delay an eruption indefinitely. Jesus Christ, you were trying to weaponize Yellowstone? We were trying to prevent World War III, the older man said quietly. If both sides could control supervolcanoes, if the threat of mutual volcanic destruction was credible, it would be like nuclear weapons. Deterrence. And instead, you trapped yourselves in 1962. We didn't mean to, the younger man said. The field was supposed to be controllable. We'd activate it for a few hours, run our tests, deactivate it. But something went wrong during the first full power test. The field stabilized, locked in place. We've been trying to shut it down for 11 months, our time. But apparently, 33 years have passed outside. I sat down, trying to process this. It was insane. It had to be insane. But I'd seen enough strange things in Yellowstone to know that the park didn't always follow normal rules. The geothermal features alone defied easy explanation. Water that boiled up from miles underground, heated by magma that could destroy civilization if it ever fully erupted. My name is Dr. Helen Marsh, the woman said. I'm the station director. This is Dr. James Kowalski, our geophysicist, and Dr. Dmitry Volkov, our seismologist. We've been alone here for almost a year, trying to find a way out. Why not just leave? Walk out the door? We tried, Helen said. Once, about 3 months into our isolation, our time, Dmitry volunteered to go outside, try to reach the main USGS office in Mammoth Hot Springs. What happened? Dmitry pulled up his sleeve, showing me his arm. The skin was mottled, scarred, like severe frostbite or burns. I made it maybe 20 feet from the door. The pain was instantaneous, like every cell in my body was being torn apart. I barely made it back inside. We think, James added, that leaving the temporal field causes rapid aging. 33 years of aging in a few seconds. Dmitry's arm experienced it before he could pull back. If he'd gone farther, his entire body would have... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. So you're stuck here, forever. We're stuck, Helen confirmed. But you came from outside. You entered the field from 1995. That means you're already synchronized with the outside time. You can leave. But if I leave, I'm leaving you here, trapped in 1962. You have to, Helen said firmly. You have to go back to your people. Tell them what's happening here. Maybe they can shut down the field from the outside. Maybe they can help us. I stood up and walked back to the corridor. I needed to think. This was too much, too strange. Part of me still wanted to believe this was some elaborate prank, but the fear in their eyes was real. The equipment was real. The pain in Dimitri's voice when he described trying to leave was real. I walked down the corridor to the entrance, the airlock where I'd first entered. I put my hand on the door handle that led outside. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," a voice said behind me. I turned. A man stood in the hallway, someone I hadn't seen before. He was younger than me, maybe late 20s, wearing modern hiking gear, North Face jacket, Gore-Tex boots. He looked like he'd just come from REI. "Who are you?" I asked. "Gary Morrison. I'm from 1984. I found this place during a winter backpacking trip 11 years ago. Well, 11 years my time. Who knows how long it's been out there?" He gestured toward the door. "You're thinking about leaving, aren't you? Going back to your life? Your time? That's the plan. Don't. Not yet. Not until you understand what you're going back to." "What do you mean?" Gary walked past me and grabbed the door handle. "Want to see what 1995 looks like from in here? Fair warning, it's not pleasant." Before I could stop him, he pulled the door open. The wind roared in, bringing snow and cold, but that wasn't what made me stagger backward. The landscape beyond the door was wrong. The sky was gray, choked with ash. The snow wasn't white, it was dirty, mixed with volcanic debris. And in the distance, where the thermal features of Norris Geyser Basin should have been, there was nothing but a smoking wasteland. What is this?" "This is 2028, Gary said, his voice hollow. 33 years after you entered, if you think in station time. Yellowstone erupted in 2027. The supervolcano finally went off, killed millions of people in the initial blast. The ash cloud covered the continent, blocked out the sun. Civilization collapsed within 6 months. That's not possible. I'm from 1995. I just came from out there. It was fine." "You came from 1995 when you entered. But the field doesn't work like that. It's not a door to a specific time. It's a door to the outside world, whenever now is relative to the station's position in the timeline. We entered in 1962. 33 years passed outside, so when we look out, we see 1995. You entered in 1995. 33 years of outside time equals 2028. I felt my knees buckle. Gary caught me, helped me stay standing. "The station is a refuge," he said quietly. "A bubble of frozen time in a universe that keeps moving forward. The scientists created it by accident, but now it's the only safe place left. Everyone who finds their way here, from whatever year they enter, they can't go back. Because back doesn't exist anymore. There's only forward, and forward is death." He closed the door, shutting out the ash-choked nightmare beyond. "Welcome to Station 7, Ranger Tanner. Welcome to the only place in Yellowstone that survived the eruption. Welcome to 1962. He walked away, leaving me standing in the airlock, staring at the closed door, knowing that on the other side was the end of the world, and understanding with horrible clarity that I was never going home. I sat in the airlock for what felt like hours, staring at the door that led to 2028, to the ash-covered wasteland that used to be Yellowstone National Park. Gary Morrison had left me alone with my thoughts, which was probably merciful. I needed time to process what I'd just seen, what I'd just learned. The whiteout that had driven me to seek shelter had been in 1995. February 14th, 1995. I'd walked maybe 2 miles through the storm and found this building. This impossible building that existed in 1962, preserved in some kind of temporal bubble created by geothermal energy and Cold War hubris. And when I'd opened the door to look outside, I'd seen 2028. 33 years of outside time had passed in the few hours I'd been inside. The equation was simple and horrifying. Time in Station 7 ran at roughly 1 day per year of outside time. What felt like a morning to me represented months or years passing in the real world. If that was true, then my family, my coworkers, everyone I knew in 1995 had already been searching for me for decades. Or they were dead, killed in the eruption that Gary said happened in 2027. I finally stood up, my legs shaky, and walked back into the main complex. I needed answers. I needed to understand exactly what had happened here, what was still happening here, and I needed to know if there was any way out. I found Helen, James, and Dimitri in what they called the commissary, a small room with a table, chairs, and surprisingly well-stocked shelves. They were eating what looked like military rations, MRES, from the early 60s, heating them on a small electric burner. "Sit down," Helen said, gesturing to an empty chair. "You look like you need food and answers. We can provide both." I sat. She pushed a tray toward me, some kind of beef stew that smelled better than it had any right to. I realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast, which had been, how long ago? Hours? Years? The thought made my head spin. "Gary showed you the outside," James said. It wasn't a question. 2028, he said Yellowstone erupted in 2027. "That matches our calculations," James said. "We've been monitoring the seismic activity through the station's instruments. They're old, but they work. We can detect earthquakes, ground deformation, changes in gas emissions. Everything pointed to an eruption happening around 2025, plus or minus a few years." "You knew it was coming? And you stayed here?" "We didn't have a choice," Dimitri said bitterly. "As I showed you, leaving the field is death. We're prisoners of our own experiment." "Tell me how this happened," I said. "All of it. From the beginning." Helen took a deep breath and began. "The Yellowstone Geothermal Research Program started in 1959, just after the Hebgen Lake earthquake. That quake, magnitude 7.3, showed us how geologically active this region still is. The Atomic Energy Commission was interested in geothermal power, and the Department of Defense was interested in, well, everything. They wanted to know if supervolcanoes could be weaponized, controlled, used as deterrents. We built 7 research stations around the caldera, each one designed to monitor different aspects of the volcanic system. Station 7, this facility, was special. It was built directly over the center of the caldera, where the magma chamber is closest to the surface. The heat differential here is extreme, temperatures of 400 degrees Fahrenheit just a few hundred feet down. James here had a theory. He believed that extreme heat and gravitational gradients could affect space-time, create what he called temporal eddies, small pockets where time moved slightly differently than the surrounding area. "It was just theoretical," James interjected. "Mathematical models, thought experiments. I never actually expected to test it." "But the military liked the idea," Helen continued. "If you could slow down time around a strategic location, you could essentially freeze your enemy's weapons, their communications, their entire infrastructure. Or if you could speed it up, you could age their equipment into uselessness." It was theoretical warfare taken to its logical extreme. So they gave us funding. We built Station 7 with specialized equipment, electromagnets, what we thought were capacitors for storing geothermal energy. On February 12, 1962, we activated the system for the first time. "And it worked," I said. "Too well. We expected maybe a few seconds of temporal displacement, a minute at most. Instead, the field locked in place. We tried to shut it down, but the controls didn't respond. The equipment had created a stable temporal bubble, and we were inside it. But you're alive. You've been here for 33 years of outside time, and you don't look like you've aged at all. Because we haven't, James said. Inside the bubble, time is flowing normally for us. We experience one day as one day, but outside, that same day is approximately 1 year. We've been here for what feels like 11 months. Outside, it's been 33 years. And you've just been sitting here for 11 months. What else could we do? Dmitri asked. We tried to leave. You saw what happened to my arm. We tried to disable the equipment, but it's self-sustaining now, drawing power directly from the geothermal heat. We tried to radio for help, but our equipment only broadcasts to 1962 frequencies. No one out there is listening anymore. We've been maintaining the station, Helen said, conducting research, trying to understand the field, hoping that someone would find us. And eventually, someone always does. Gary in 1984. Others before him, and now you. How many others? Helen stood and walked to a filing cabinet. She pulled out a ledger, old paper yellowed with age, and opened it to a marked page. We started keeping records after the third visitor. This is everyone who's entered Station 7 from the outside. I looked at the ledger. Names, dates, brief notes. March 1963, station time. 1964, outside time. Robert Chen, USGS geologist. Entered seeking shelter from storm. Informed of situation. Left after 3 days, station time. Status unknown. July 1965, station time. 1968, outside time. Margaret Reeves, Yellowstone employee. Entered during survey work. Stayed 2 weeks, station time. Attempted to leave. Status deceased. October 1967, station time. 1972, outside time. Thomas Wyatt, lost hiker. Entered by accident. Became violent upon learning situation. Restrained and sedated. Left during sleep. Status unknown. The list went on. 15 people over the years, each one finding Station 7, learning the truth, making their choice. Some tried to leave immediately. Some stayed for weeks or months. Some, like Gary, were still here. Why is Gary still here? I asked. Because he opened the door and saw what you saw, Helen said. 1995 for him looked the same as 2028 looks for you. The eruption had already happened. There was nowhere to go back to. But the first visitors, the ones from the 60s and 70s, they could have gone back to a world that still existed. Some did. Robert Chen, the first one, he left after 3 days. Walked out into 1964 and we never saw him again. We don't know if he survived the transition or if he aged to death the moment he stepped outside the field. Margaret Reeves tried it in 1968. We watched through the window. She made it about 30 feet before she collapsed. We brought her body back inside, but it was too late. She'd aged 50 years and 50 seconds. I felt sick. So, anyone who leaves dies? Not necessarily, James said. If you enter the station from year X and immediately leave, you should only age a few hours or days, however long you were inside. But if you stay for months or years of station time, corresponding to decades of outside time, then yes, leaving would be fatal. How long have I been here? James looked at his watch. A mechanical wind-up model from the early 60s. You arrived approximately 4 hours ago, station time. If our calculations are correct, about 4 months have passed outside. You entered in February 1995. It's now June 1995 in the outside world. 4 months. I'd been missing for 4 months from my ranger station's perspective. They would have searched for me, found nothing, eventually declared me dead. My apartment would be cleaned out, my belongings divided among family. My life would be over. But I could still leave. 4 months of aging wouldn't kill me. I'd be disoriented, maybe, but alive, unless I opened the door and saw 2028 again. I don't understand, I said. When I look outside, why do I see 2028? Shouldn't I see June 1995? That's the part we don't fully understand, James admitted. The field doesn't just slow time, it disconnects it. When you look outside from inside the field, you're seeing the outside world at a point in time relative to the station's creation, not relative to your entry. The station was created in 1962. 66 years later would be 2028. But that doesn't make sense. Why would the station show me 66 years ahead when I've only been here for 4 hours? Because the field is locked to 1962, Helen said. Everything inside experiences time from that anchor point. You entered from 1995, but once you crossed the threshold, you became part of the 1962 timeline. The outside world continues forward from 1962 at an accelerated rate relative to us. By the time you look out, 66 years have passed outside. My head hurt trying to understand the logic. So I can never go back to 1995. Not by walking out that door, no. The moment you entered, 1995 became your past. The door only leads forward. Then I'm as trapped as you are. Not yet, Gary said from the doorway. I hadn't heard him approach. You've only been here 4 hours. In station time, that's nothing. You could still try to leave, take your chances with 4 months of aging. Or you could stay a little longer, learn more, see if there's another way out. Is there another way out? We've been working on theories, James said. He walked to the chalkboard in the commissary covered in equations and diagrams. The temporal field is created by the geothermal energy differential. If we could disrupt that differential, equalize the temperatures, the field might collapse. How do you disrupt a geothermal system? That's the problem. We can't. Not from inside the station. But if someone outside, someone with access to the caldera's geothermal features, could redirect the heat flow, channel it away from this location, it might work. But anyone outside is in 2028, after the eruption. Not necessarily, Helen said. The field is unstable. Sometimes it fluctuates, creates brief connections to other time periods. We've detected it on our instruments, moments where the temporal lock loosens, where the door might lead somewhere other than the standard progression. How often does that happen? Rarely, maybe once or twice a year, station time. But when it does, there's a window, a few minutes at most, where you could potentially exit into a different time period. Like 1995, or 1970, or 2010, or any point in the timeline. We can't predict it. We can only watch the instruments and hope. I stood and walked to the window that looked out over the installation. Through the reinforced glass, I could see the ash-covered landscape of 2028, the dead remnants of Yellowstone. Steam still rose from some of the thermal features, proof that even a supervolcanic eruption couldn't completely kill the geothermal system. But everything else was gone. The forests, the wildlife, the millions of visitors who'd come to see Old Faithful erupt and walk among the hot springs. All gone. How many people died? I asked quietly. In the eruption? Millions, James said. The initial blast would have devastated Wyoming, Montana, Idaho. The ash fall would have covered most of North America. The climate effects would have triggered crop failures, famine, societal collapse. By our calculations, global population would have decreased by 60 to 70% within 5 years. And we're in here, safe, while the world ended. That's survivor's guilt talking. Helen said. We didn't choose this. We didn't want to create a temporal prison. We were trying to prevent exactly this scenario, and instead, we made ourselves witnesses to it. Witnesses who can't do anything. We can remember, she said. We can document. We can hope that someday someone will find a way to use what we've learned here. The field equations, the temporal mechanics, all of it is recorded in our journals. If someone ever breaks us out, if the field ever collapses, that knowledge goes with us. An alarm started beeping, a harsh electronic sound that made us all jump. James ran to the operations center and we followed. The instrument panels were lit up, needles jumping on various gauges. What is it? I asked. Seismic activity, James said, his eyes scanning the readouts. Major earthquake close to the station, magnitude 7.5, maybe higher. Is the station in danger? The building is reinforced, designed to withstand quakes, but the field... He pointed to a specific gauge, a custom-built device with a dial labeled temporal stability. The needle was dropping rapidly. The earthquake is disrupting the geothermal system. The heat differential is changing. Is that good or bad? I don't know. If it equalizes completely, the field might collapse. We'd be released back into normal time. Which is 2028, I said. After the eruption. We'd collapse into an ash-covered wasteland. Unless the fluctuation creates a window, Helen said. James, check the temporal variance readings. James moved to another instrument. This one with a paper chart recorder. The needle was drawing a jagged line, spiking and dropping erratically. Variance is off the charts. The lock is loosening. We might have a window. To when? Unknown, but if we're going to try to leave, now might be our only chance. I looked at the three scientists, at Gary standing in the doorway, at the equipment that had been their prison for 33 years. You're all coming, right? If there's a window, we all leave together? Dmitri shook his head. I can't. My exposure from the last attempt, the aging my arm experienced, it's made me too fragile. If I try to leave and the transition fails, I'll die immediately. I'm staying, Gary said. I've been here 11 years station time. That's decades outside. Even if the window leads to a safe time period, I'm already dead out there. But you, Tanner, you've only been here hours. You have a chance. What about you two? I asked Helen and James. They looked at each other. A long moment of silent communication. We built this place, Helen said. We created this disaster. If there's any chance of fixing it, of shutting down the field properly, we need to stay and keep trying. You've been trying for 11 months. Then we'll try for 11 more. But you need to go. Find out what's happening outside, whether it's 1995 or 2028 or some other time. Document what you see. Tell people what happened here. The alarm got louder. James looked at the instruments and cursed. The window is opening. Temporal lock at 40%, 35. It's collapsing fast. How do I know where I'll end up? You don't, but staying here guarantees you'll never leave. Going means a chance, however small. I ran to the airlock, my heart pounding. Through the small window in the door, I could see the landscape outside, shifting, flickering like a bad television signal. One moment, it was the ash-covered 2028. The next, it was something else, harder to see. Snow, green grass, different seasons, different years, all overlapping. Temporal lock at 20%, James shouted from the operations center. I grabbed the door handle. Wait, Helen said, running up with a small notebook. Take this, it's our research, everything we've learned about the field. If you make it out, give it to someone who can use it. I took the notebook and shoved it inside my jacket. 10%. 5. Window closing. I pulled the door open. The landscape beyond was... I couldn't tell. It kept shifting. One second it was winter, the next summer, the next autumn. Different decades, different timelines, all existing simultaneously in the collapsing temporal field. I stepped through. The transition hit me like a physical blow. I felt my body stretching, compressing, aging and de-aging all at once. My vision blurred, and I couldn't tell if I was falling or flying or just ceasing to exist. And then suddenly I was on solid ground. I lay in the snow, gasping, my whole body aching. I looked up at the sky. Clear. Blue. No ash. I checked my watch. It was working again. The GPS was working again. I was at the Norris Geyser Basin, exactly where I'd been when the whiteout hit. I stood up on shaky legs and looked around. The landscape was familiar. Steam rising from the thermal features. Trees in the distance. Everything looked normal. I activated my radio. Mammoth Dispatch, this is Ranger Tanner. Do you copy? Static, then a voice. Tanner, is that you? Jesus Christ, where have you been? We've had search teams looking for you for 2 days. 2 days, not 4 months. Not 33 years. 2 days. I got lost in the whiteout. I'm at Norris, heading back now. Copy that. We'll send a team to meet you. I started walking, then stopped and turned around. The research station was gone. Just empty, snow-covered ground where it had been. I pulled out the notebook Helen had given me and opened it. Blank pages. The research, the equations, everything had vanished. Or maybe it had never existed. Maybe I'd hallucinated the whole thing, suffering from hypothermia during the whiteout. But when I reached inside my jacket pocket, I found something else. A photograph, old and faded. It showed 4 people in lab coats standing in front of a building I recognized. Station 7. Written on the back in Helen's handwriting. USGS Station, 7 February 1962. H. Marsh, J. Kowalski, D. Volkov, G. Morrison. Remember us. I pocketed the photograph and kept walking. 2 days had passed for the outside world, but for me, I'd spent hours in a place that existed in 1962, that would continue to exist in 1962 for as long as the temporal field held. They were still there. Helen, James, Dimitri, Gary, trapped in their frozen moment, waiting for the window to open again. And I was the only person who knew they existed, the only person who could tell their story. But who would believe me? I didn't tell anyone about Station 7, not at first. When the rescue team met me at the Norris Access Road, I told them I'd found shelter in a thermal cave, waited out the storm, and lost track of time. They seemed satisfied with that explanation. Hypothermia can do strange things to your perception of time, they said. You're lucky to be alive, they said. I went through the standard medical evaluation, passed all the tests, and was cleared for duty within a week. On paper, I'd been missing for 48 hours. In my mind, I'd spent half a day in a place that existed 33 years in the past and witnessed the end of the world 33 years in the future. The photograph was real. I kept it in a locked drawer in my ranger station office, taking it out sometimes late at night when I was alone. 4 people in lab coats, smiling at the camera, standing in front of a building that officially didn't exist. Helen Marsh, James Kowalski, Dmitri Volkov, Gary Morrison. I'd memorized their faces, their voices, their stories. They were still there. Right now, in 1962, experiencing another day while decades passed in the world outside. Waiting for another window to open, another chance at escape. I tried to find records of them. USGS archives, government databases, anything that would confirm their existence. I found nothing about Station 7. The official history of the Yellowstone Geothermal Research Program mentioned only 6 stations, numbered 1 through 6. Station 7 didn't exist. But I did find personnel records. Dr. Helen Marsh, volcanologist, USGS. Last known assignment, Yellowstone, 1962. Status, missing, presumed dead in field accident. Dr. James Kowalski, geophysicist, MIT doctorate. Disappeared, 1962. Dr. Dmitry Volkov, seismologist, defected from Soviet Union in 1959. Vanished, 1962. 3 scientists who disappeared in February 1962 and were never found. Until I found them. I went back to Norris Geyser Basin 3 weeks after my rescue. It was a clear day, no storms, full daylight. I hiked to the exact coordinates where Station 7 had been, using the GPS reading I'd recorded before entering. Nothing. Just thermal features, snow, and trees. I walked the area for hours, looking for any sign of the building. A foundation, disturbed ground, anything. The station was gone. Or more accurately, it had never been there in 1995. It existed in 1962. Trapped in its temporal bubble, invisible and inaccessible to anyone in normal time. Unless you entered during a whiteout. Unless the conditions were exactly right. Unless the temporal field fluctuated and created a bridge between timelines. I started monitoring weather patterns obsessively. Severe winter storms that would create whiteout conditions in the Norris area. I volunteered for every backcountry patrol during storm season, always taking routes that passed near those coordinates. My supervisor noticed. "Tanner, you trying to get yourself killed? You've requested hazardous weather patrol duty 8 times in the past 2 months. What's going on?" I like the solitude, the park's purest in winter. He didn't buy it, but he let me keep volunteering. I was good at my job, experienced, capable. If I wanted to risk my life walking into blizzards, that was my choice. 4 months passed. Summer came, and with it the tourists. I went through the motions, giving talks about geothermal features, warning people to stay on the boardwalks, answering the same questions 1,000 times. The whole time I was thinking about Station 7, about Helen and James and the others, experiencing their slow days while years passed outside. In their timeline, I'd left 4 hours ago. In mine, it had been 4 months. The math was simple. Their 4 hours equaled my 4 months. 1 station hour equaled 1 month of outside time. 1 station day equaled 2.5 years outside. They'd been there 11 months when I arrived. That was 27.5 years of outside time, give or take. If they'd started in February 1962, they'd witnessed up to 1989 or 1990 through their instruments, even though they experienced it as less than a year. I wondered what they were doing right now. This very moment. Were they in the commissary, eating their eternal supply of 1962 rations? Were they in the operations center, watching the seismic monitors? Were they talking about me, the ranger who'd appeared for 4 hours and then vanished back into the timeline? Or had more time passed for them than I realized? Had they experienced days or weeks since I left, watching through their instruments as years flew by outside, waiting for another window that might never come? I needed to know. I needed to get back. October brought the first major winter storm of the season. I was scheduled for a routine patrol, but I deliberately diverted toward Norris. The storm hit harder than predicted, visibility dropping to 0 within minutes, perfect conditions. I made my way to the coordinates, fighting through snow that was already knee-deep. The wind howled, temperature plummeting, classic whiteout, the kind that had driven me to the station the first time. I reached the spot and stopped, waiting, hoping. Nothing happened. I stood there for 2 hours, slowly freezing until I had to give up and make my way back to the ranger cabin. The station didn't appear. The temporal field didn't fluctuate. I'd just risked my life for nothing. I tried again in November, and December, and January. Each time, I engineered excuses to be in the area during severe storms. Each time, nothing. My supervisor called me in after the January attempt. "Tanner, I'm worried about you. This obsession with winter patrol, it's not healthy. You're taking unnecessary risks. What's really going on?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You've changed since that incident in February. The one where you went missing for 2 days. Did something happen out there? Something you're not telling us?" I almost told him. Almost pulled out the photograph and explained everything, but I could imagine his reaction. Concern. Skepticism, maybe a mandatory psychological evaluation. He'd think I'd suffered a breakdown during the hypothermia episode, created an elaborate fantasy to cope with the trauma. Nothing happened. I got lost. I waited it out. I came back. That's all. He didn't believe me, but he couldn't prove anything. "Take some time off. Visit family. Get some distance from the park. That's an order." I took the time off. 2 weeks at my sister's place in Bozeman. She noticed the change in me, too. "You seem distracted, distant, like you're not really here." She was right. Part of me was still in Station 7, in that frozen moment of 1962, trapped with 4 people who couldn't escape their own timeline. When I returned to Yellowstone in February 1996, exactly 1 year after my first encounter with the station, I made a decision. I would try one more time. If the station appeared, I'd go back in, talk to Helen and the others, try to help them find a way out. If it didn't appear, I'd accept that it was over, that they were beyond my reach. I waited for the right storm. It came on February 14th, 1 year to the day after my original disappearance. The symmetry felt significant, though I knew that was probably just my mind finding patterns where none existed. The whiteout was worse than I remembered. I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I made it to the coordinates and stopped, standing in the exact spot where I'd first seen the station. And there it was. The building materialized out of the snow, solid and real. The same bunker-like concrete structure, the same steel door. Relief and dread washed over me in equal measure. I approached and pulled open the outer door. The warm air enveloped me as I stepped into the airlock. The inner door was ahead, the red emergency lights casting their familiar crimson glow. I opened it and stepped inside. The corridor was empty, quiet. I walked to the operations center, my footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. Helen was there, alone, sitting at the instrument panels. She looked up when I entered, and her face cycled through surprise, relief, and something like joy. "Ranger Tanner, you came back." "I said I would." "That was 4 hours ago. For us. How long has it been for you?" 1 year. She nodded slowly. "The equations hold. 1 hour here equals 1 month outside. You've been gone for 12 months, we've experienced 12 hours. Time is consistent, at least. Where are the others?" "James is in Lab 2, working on the field equations. Dimitri is sleeping. Gary is in the commissary. We've settled into routines. It helps with the monotony. How are you holding up?" "We're alive. That's something." She stood and walked to the window that looked out over the installation. "We can see outside, you know, through the instruments. Seismographs, temperature sensors, gas monitors. They still connect to the outside world, even though we don't. We've been watching Yellowstone change over the years. Small earthquakes, variations in geothermal output, subtle signs that the system is building toward something. The eruption. Yes, our calculations suggest 2027, plus or minus 2 years. We're watching it happen in slow motion, one day at a time for us, while years pass outside. It's like watching a clock count down to midnight, knowing exactly what will happen when it strikes 12. Is there any way to stop it? Stop a supervolcano eruption? No. We're talking about pressures and energies beyond human scale. If we'd had decades to work on it, maybe we could have found ways to relieve the pressure gradually, prevent the catastrophic release. But we don't have decades. We have hours and days stretched out over years of outside time. I pulled out the photograph, the one that had appeared in my pocket after I left. This was in my jacket when I got back. Did you give it to me? She took the photograph and studied it. I don't remember giving you this, but time is strange here. Maybe I will give it to you. Maybe it's something that hasn't happened yet from my perspective. That doesn't make sense. Nothing about this place makes sense, Ranger Tanner. We're living in a moment that ended 34 years ago for the outside world. We're watching the future approach while trapped in the past. Causality doesn't work normally here. James entered the operations center, saw me, and smiled. You made it back. I wasn't sure you would. I had to. I've been trying for months to find this place again. This is the first time it's appeared. The fluctuations are irregular, James said. We can't predict them. Sometimes the field stabilizes for months at a time, no variances at all. Other times it oscillates wildly. We think it has to do with seismic activity, changes in the magma chamber pressure, maybe even tidal forces from the moon. Too many variables. I want to help you. There has to be a way to shut this down, to get you out. We appreciate that, but we've accepted our situation. We're not getting out. Not alive anyway. But you can do something for us. Anything. Helen pulled out a metal box from under the console. We've been documenting everything. Our research, the field equations, observations of the temporal effects, seismic data from decades of monitoring. It's all in here. If you can get this out, get it to scientists who can use it, maybe some good can come from our mistake. You want me to take it back with me? Physical objects can pass through the field more easily than people. The aging effect is less pronounced. The box should survive the transition. But how do I explain where I got it? How do I explain any of this without sounding insane? You don't have to explain. Just leave it where it can be found. Anonymously. Let the data speak for itself. Scientists will recognize the significance of the temporal mechanics research. The seismic data alone could save lives if another eruption is coming. I took the box. It was heavy, packed with the notebooks and data logs. What about you? If I take this and leave, when will I see you again? You won't, Helen said softly. The fluctuations are getting less frequent. This might be the last time the field opens enough to allow passage. We wanted to make sure if anyone came back, they'd be able to carry this out. So this is goodbye. This is goodbye. Gary appeared in the doorway. Thought I heard voices. Tanner, you actually came back. That takes guts or stupidity, not sure which. I couldn't leave you here without trying to help. We're beyond help, but we appreciate the sentiment. He held out his hand. Take care of yourself out there. Don't make the mistake I made, trying to go back to a world that doesn't exist anymore. I shook his hand, then Dimitri's when he emerged from the sleeping quarters, groggy but aware enough to say goodbye. The alarm started beeping again. The same sound as before, warning of temporal instability. It's starting, James said, checking the instruments. Temporal lock dropping. You need to go now while the window is open. I headed to the airlock, the metal box under my arm. Helen followed me. Ranger Tanner, David, thank you for coming back, for listening to us, for making us feel like we mattered, even trapped in this frozen moment. You do matter. What you discovered here, what you learned about time and space, it's important. People will know about it. I'll make sure of that. Just promise me one thing. Don't come back. Don't try to find us again. Live your life. Don't let our mistake trap you too. I promise. I pulled open the door. The landscape outside was shifting again, different times overlapping. I could see flashes of various eras, seasons, conditions. And in the distance, for just a moment, I saw it clearly. 1995. February. My time. I stepped through. The transition was easier this time, or maybe I was just more prepared for it. I felt the temporal displacement, the brief sensation of existing in multiple times at once, and then I was standing in snow, in daylight, in 1995. I checked my watch. February 14th, 1996, 2:47 p.m. I'd been inside for less than an hour from the outside world's perspective. I turned around. The station was gone, dissolved back into its temporal bubble. But I had the box, solid proof that it had all been real. Over the next few months, I carefully cataloged the contents. Detailed equations describing temporal field mechanics, seismic data spanning from 1962 to the early 1990s, showing the gradual buildup of pressure in the Yellowstone magma chamber. Observations about geothermal energy and its effects on spacetime. It was brilliant work, decades ahead of anything publicly available. If I could get this to the right people, it could revolutionize physics, geology, our understanding of time itself, but I'd promised Helen I wouldn't try to explain where it came from. So I did what she suggested. I anonymously mailed portions of the data to different universities, research institutions, government agencies, always with no return address, always with a brief note. Research findings from Yellowstone thermal monitoring 1962 to 1995. Origin confidential. Please verify and publish if useful. Some of it was dismissed as a hoax. Some of it was taken seriously, inspiring new research into geothermal systems and temporal physics. The seismic data was particularly valuable, helping scientists better understand the warning signs of volcanic eruptions. I never told anyone about Station 7 directly, but the work of Helen, James, Dimitri, and the others made it into the scientific community, helping people they would never meet, in a timeline they could never fully be part of. Years passed. I kept working at Yellowstone, kept my promise not to try to find the station again. Every February 14th, I thought about them. Another year passing outside, another few hours inside. By 2027, if the equations held, they'd have experienced about 2 years of station time. Still trapped, still waiting, still watching through their instruments as the countdown to eruption approached. I was in Mammoth Hot Springs on June 15th, 2027, when it happened. The earthquake started at 6:23 a.m., a swarm of tremors that built in intensity over the course of hours. By noon, we knew it was happening. The supervolcano was erupting. The evacuation orders came fast. Get out of the park, get out of Wyoming, get as far east as you could, as fast as you could. The ash cloud would kill anyone who stayed. I joined the evacuation convoy, one of the last rangers to leave. As we drove east on Highway 14, I looked back at the park one final time. Smoke and ash were already rising from the caldera, a dark column reaching into the stratosphere. Somewhere in that chaos, in a bubble of frozen time locked to 1962, 4 people were watching it happen through their instruments, watching their calculations prove correct, watching the world end outside their refuge. The station would survive. The temporal field would protect them from the eruption. but they'd be trapped forever in a moment surrounded by devastation, the only human beings in hundreds of miles, isolated in space and time. I thought about Helen's face when I said goodbye. The resignation in her eyes. She'd known this day was coming. She'd spent 65 years of outside time, 2 years of her subjective experience, preparing for it. The eruption was as bad as predicted. Millions died. The ash cloud covered half of North America. The climate effects triggered a cascade of disasters worldwide. But in a bunker at the center of the caldera, in a frozen moment of 1962, 4 people continued their work, documenting, researching, hoping that someday someone would find a way to free them. I survived. I made it to the East Coast, started a new life far from Yellowstone. But I never forgot Station 7, never stopped thinking about the people trapped there. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I made the right choice. If I should have stayed. If I should have accepted the frozen moment instead of returning to a world that was heading toward catastrophe. But I made a promise, and I kept it. That has to be enough. I'm writing this in 2045, 18 years after the Yellowstone eruption. The world has changed in ways that would have been unimaginable before the caldera blew. The ash has settled, most of it, but the scars remain. The American Midwest is still largely uninhabitable. The climate shift, triggered by the eruption, caused crop failures that led to famines, wars, mass migrations. Civilization didn't collapse completely, but it came close. I'm 74 years old now. I've lived through the worst disaster in human history, and I've carried a secret for 50 years that I'm finally ready to share. Station 7 still exists. I know because I went back. It happened 3 months ago in February 2045, exactly 50 years after my first encounter with the temporal field. I don't believe in fate or cosmic significance, but the symmetry was too perfect to ignore. I'd spent the past 18 years in what used to be Virginia, in one of the refugee settlements that sprang up after the eruption. I worked as a teacher, passing on what I knew about wilderness survival, geology, the natural world. I never mentioned my past as a Yellowstone ranger. That life was gone, buried under millions of tons of ash. But I thought about Station 7 every day. Wondered if it had survived the eruption, if the temporal field had protected the building from the blast. Wondered about Helen, James, Dimitri, and Gary. How much time had passed for them? Years? Decades? The math was simple. From 1962 to 2045 was 83 years of outside time. If the temporal field held constant at 1 day per year, they would have experienced about 83 days, less than 3 months of subjective time, spread across 8 decades. But I had no way to reach them. The Yellowstone region was quarantined, too dangerous to enter. The ash was still toxic, the geothermal features unstable, the infrastructure completely destroyed. The few scientific expeditions that had ventured into the exclusion zone had done so with full hazmat gear and military support. I didn't have access to any of that. I was just an old man living in a world that had been broken by the very disaster I'd witnessed coming through Station 7's instruments decades earlier. Then I got the letter. It arrived in January 2045, addressed to David Tanner, former Yellowstone NPS ranger. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with coordinates and a date. The location of Station 7 and February 14th, 2045. The handwriting was Helen's. I recognized it from the notebooks she'd given me in 1996. But how? She was trapped in 1962, unable to send letters forward in time. Unless the temporal field was more complex than any of us had understood. Beneath the coordinates and date, she'd written 3 words: final window, come. I spent the next month preparing. I was too old for this, my body worn down by decades of hard living in the post-eruption world. But I had to try. If there was one more window, one more chance to see them, I couldn't pass it up. Getting into the Yellowstone exclusion zone was easier than I expected. The security had relaxed over the years as resources became scarce. The authorities were more concerned with surviving than guarding a dead park. I joined a salvage team heading into the zone to recover equipment from abandoned monitoring stations, and when we reached the edge of the caldera, I slipped away. The landscape was alien, nothing like the Yellowstone I remembered. The ash had transformed everything into a gray wasteland. The forests were gone, reduced to skeletal trunks. The geothermal features still steamed and bubbled, but they were surrounded by devastation, and over it all hung the smell of sulfur and decay. I made my way to the coordinates using an old handheld GPS I'd kept from my ranger days. It still worked, miraculously. The satellites had survived the eruption better than civilization had. When I reached the location, I saw it. Station 7, exactly as I remembered, standing intact in the middle of the ash field. The temporal bubble had protected it from the blast, just as I'd hoped. The building looked untouched, a relic from 1962 preserved in the ruins of 2045. I approached the door and pulled it open. The familiar wash of warm air greeted me. The red emergency lights still glowed in the airlock. Everything was the same. I stepped inside and walked to the operations center. They were all there. Helen, James, Dimitri, Gary. But they'd aged. Not drastically, but noticeably. Helen's hair was completely gray now. James had deep lines around his eyes. They'd been here for 83 days, subjective time, almost 3 months of living in their frozen moment. Helen stood when she saw me. "David, you came. You sent for me. How did you mail that letter?" "We didn't mail it. We put it in the airlock with instructions to deliver it to you in 2045. The objects that pass through the field during fluctuations, they can move forward in time. We've been experimenting with it for years, our time, learning to use the windows to send things forward. Why bring me back? I promised I wouldn't try to find you again." "Because the field is collapsing," James said. He was at the instrument panels, and I could see the readings were wild, needles swinging erratically. The eruption destabilized the geothermal system. The heat differential that maintains the temporal bubble is equalizing. We have maybe 24 hours, station time, before it fails completely. When it fails, what happens to you? We collapse back into normal time, back into 2045. We'll have aged 83 days, not enough to kill us, but we'll be standing in the middle of a toxic ash field, without supplies, without any way to survive. Unless you leave now, through the window, while it's still open. That's why we called you, Helen said. We need help. We're too weak to make it out of the exclusion zone on our own. But if someone was waiting outside, someone who knew the territory, we might have a chance. I looked at the 4 of them. Decades trapped in this building, and now, finally, a way out. But into a world that was far worse than the one they'd left. You know what it's like out there, right? The eruption destroyed everything. Millions dead. Society barely functioning. It's not the world you remember from 1962. We know, Helen said. We've been watching through the instruments. We've seen it all. But even a broken world is better than this prison. What do you need me to do? We need time. 4 or 5 hours, station time to prepare. To gather what we can carry to shut down the station properly. Can you wait? I looked at my watch. 4 hours station time is 4 months outside time. Approximately. The field is fluctuating, so it might be less. Maybe 3 months, maybe 2. But you'll be alone out there, in the ash field for months. I brought supplies. Enough for a few weeks. I can make it work. Thank you, David. I spent the next 4 hours, their time, setting up a camp outside the station. I found a partially collapsed building about a quarter-mile away that provided some shelter from the ash that still fell occasionally. I rationed my supplies carefully, knowing I'd need to make them last. The isolation was profound. No one else for hundreds of miles. Just me, the ash, and the station in the distance, visible through the gray haze. I thought about Helen and the others inside, experiencing their final day in the temporal bubble. Decades of outside time condensed into hours. A lifetime of imprisonment ending at last. Days passed. Then weeks. I marked time by the movement of the sun, barely visible through the ash clouds. I ran low on food and resorted to catching thermal pool bacteria and extremophile organisms that had survived in the hot springs. It was disgusting, but it kept me alive. After what I estimated was 3 months, I saw movement at the station. The door opened and 4 figures emerged, moving slowly, carefully. I ran toward them, or as close to running as my 74-year-old body could manage. They were there. Real. Outside the temporal field for the first time in 83 years. Helen collapsed first. I caught her, helped her sit down. She was crying, tears cutting tracks through the ash on her face. "We're out," she whispered. "After everything, we're actually out. How do you feel?" "Weak, dizzy, but alive." She looked around at the devastated landscape. "This is 2045. This is 2045. This is what the eruption did." James was on his knees, touching the ash-covered ground like he couldn't believe it was real. Dimitri was staring at his hands, watching them shake. Gary was the only one still standing, though he looked unsteady. "We made it," Gary said. 63 years. For me, it was 63 years, but I made it. "Can you walk? We need to get to the evacuation point. I've got a signal beacon for the salvage team. They'll pick us up." It took us 3 days to reach the extraction point, moving slowly through the ash field. I activated the beacon, and 12 hours later a transport vehicle arrived. The crew was surprised to find 5 people instead of 1, but they didn't ask too many questions. In the post-eruption world, strange survivors in the exclusion zone were becoming more common. We were taken to a processing center, decontaminated, medically evaluated. The doctors were amazed by Helen, James, Dimitri, and Gary. They'd aged so little despite claiming to have been trapped since 1962. The medical examinations showed they were telling the truth. Their cellular age matched their chronological age, but their calendrical age was impossible. I told them the truth. All of it. Station 7. The temporal field. The 83 years in 83 days. I showed them the notebooks, the data I'd kept for decades. I gave them access to everything. Some believed me. Some thought we were all suffering from shared delusions brought on by trauma and isolation. But the evidence was there. The research in Helen's notebooks matched cutting-edge temporal physics. The seismic data from the instruments had predicted the 2027 eruption with startling accuracy. Slowly, the scientific community started to take it seriously. Expeditions were sent to find the remains of Station 7. They found it exactly where I said it would be. The building was collapsing now, the temporal field gone, but the equipment was still there, the logs, the proof. The discovery changed everything. The temporal field equations revolutionized physics. The seismic monitoring techniques helped predict future eruptions at volcanoes around the world. The work that Helen, James, and Dimitri had done in their frozen moment ended up saving countless lives. They became famous, in the academic world at least. The scientists who spent 83 years in 83 days. The researchers who'd witnessed the future from the past. But they struggled to adapt. The world of 2045 was so different from 1962 that they might as well have been on another planet. The technology, the culture, the language, everything had evolved in ways they couldn't have imagined. They were perpetual refugees from time, never quite belonging anywhere. Gary integrated the best. He'd already lost his world in 1984, so losing it again in 2045 was just more of the same. He became a consultant, helping researchers understand the temporal field. Dmitri found work at a university, teaching seismology to a new generation of students. But he was haunted by what he'd seen through the station's instruments, the decades of earthquakes and disasters that he'd monitored while trapped. James retreated into his research, trying to understand if the temporal field could be recreated, controlled, used to help humanity. He believed they could build new stations, temporal refuges where people could wait out disasters. The idea terrified most people, but he kept working on it anyway. Helen was different. She'd lost the most, I think. She'd been a young scientist in 1962, with a promising career and a whole life ahead of her. She'd sacrificed all of it, inadvertently by activating the field. Now, she was an old woman in a broken world, famous for being a cautionary tale. She came to visit me a few months after our extraction. We sat on the porch of my small house in the settlement, watching the ash-colored sunset. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Creating the station, the temporal field?" "Every day, but I also know that our work mattered. The equations we developed, the data we gathered, it's helping people. That has to count for something." "It counts for a lot." I keep thinking about the others, the ones who found the station over the years and left. Robert Chen, Margaret Reeves, all of them. They walked out into their futures not knowing if they'd survive. Some did, some didn't. We were the ones who stayed, who waited, who got trapped. Were we cowards, or were we smart? You were survivors. That's all that matters. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "David, I need to tell you something. About the photograph. The one that appeared in my pocket after my first visit. Yes, I didn't give it to you, not consciously. But I think the station did. The temporal field has a strange property. It preserves information, loops it, creates connections across time. The photograph existed because it needed to exist. Because you needed proof to believe us, to come back, to eventually save us. That's a paradox. The whole station is a paradox, a moment that exists outside time, created by people trying to control time, survived by people who can never truly be part of time again." She pulled out an old notebook, one I recognized from the station. "I've been working on a theory. The field didn't trap us randomly. It created a stable time loop, a self-sustaining narrative where everything that happened had to happen exactly the way it did. So none of us had a choice? We all had choices. But the outcomes were predetermined by the structure of the loop itself. You had to find us in 1995. You had to leave and take the data. You had to come back in 2045. We had to wait exactly 83 years. Every piece fell into place because the loop demanded it." That's terrifying. Or comforting. It means we all played our parts perfectly. The station served its purpose, protected us through the eruption, gave us time to complete our research, and then it released us exactly when we needed to be released. I thought about that. The idea that my entire journey, from finding the station to rescuing them, had been part of a predetermined loop. It should have felt like I'd lost free will, like I'd been a puppet dancing on temporal strings. But instead, it felt like purpose, like meaning. We sat together in silence, two old people who'd been touched by something beyond normal understanding. The station was gone now, collapsed back into normal time, but its effects would ripple forward forever. Years later, in 2050, I attended James Kowalski's funeral. He'd died working on his temporal refuge project, still trying to recreate the field that had imprisoned him. His last words, according to his students, were, "I finally understand why it had to be 1962. Dmitri passed in 2053, peacefully in his sleep. His last published paper was a retrospective on seismic monitoring, including data from his 83 days in the station. Gary Morrison lasted until 2055. He spent his final years writing a memoir about his experience, though he never finished it. The manuscript ended mid-sentence appropriately enough, frozen in an incomplete moment. Helen is still alive as I write this. She's 98 years old, though her body only experienced 83 days plus 13 years, so biologically she's in her 60s. She's become something of a legend in scientific circles, the woman who lived through time itself. As for me, I'm 79 now. I've lived an extraordinary life, witnessed things that shouldn't be possible, carried secrets that changed the world. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that frozen moment, about what it would have been like to stay in Station 7, to experience one day for every year that passed outside, to watch the world age while I remained unchanged. Would it have been a prison, or would it have been peace? I'll never know. I made my choice in 1996 when I walked out of the station and back into the timeline. I chose the world, with all its chaos and change and eventual disaster. I chose to live in time instead of outside it. And Helen, James, Dmitri, and Gary chose to wait. They chose the frozen moment, the eternal 1962, until the moment itself chose to release them. Neither choice was wrong. Neither was right. They were just choices, made by people trying to survive the impossible. The station is gone now. The temporal field collapsed completely in 2045, the moment we walked out. The building itself was demolished by the eruption's aftershocks, reduced to rubble in the ash field. But the data remains, the equations, the proof that time can be bent, folded, preserved. The knowledge that somewhere between the geothermal heat of the Earth and the quantum nature of reality, there are moments that can be frozen, loops that can be created, refuges from the passage of time. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see it. Station 7, standing in the snow, glowing with red emergency lights. A doorway between decades. A frozen moment in the heart of a dying world. The place where I learned that time is not a river flowing in one direction. It's a labyrinth, and some of us spend our whole lives trying to find our way out.